I'm glad we're doing this though. Because I was originally going to wait and go through it kind of meticulously, but you're right. Actually, you whenever you said let's just go ahead and knock this out because it just happened, we might as well take a look at it. That being said, let me introduce you, Michael. This is Michael Shermer. He's a author, a best-selling author of books like Conspiracy, The Moral Arc, Why People Believe Weird Things, and this is kind of an impromptu conversation that Michael and I are going to have here, where we're going to discuss this recent rally that was held in Washington, D.C. I think it was a few days ago. It was either Saturday or Sunday, and it was called Rescue the Republic, and it was organized by Bret Weinstein, Weinstein, who is the evolutionary biologist most famous for being yelled at by green-haired people of some sort. But it went on to be weirdly uh, very influential person, as far as I can tell, and has morphed into something much more than a evolutionary biologist. He's apparently an expert in many fields now or something. Um, all this to say, before we get going here, and I'll say this to Michael and to the viewers, whatever I say here, Michael doesn't know what my responses will be, or really my deep politics. So I could potentially say a lot of things that Michael will disagree with, and that would be, and actually that would be kind of interesting to talk about. Um, and so anything that I say is not a reflection of what Michael thinks, and likewise either which way. So just to put that disclaimer out there. Um, that being said, did you watch like the whole thing, Michael, or just take snippets of it?
I mostly just watched snippets of it. I didn't even know it was going to happen, and I was just scrolling through my Twitter feed at the late afternoon on Sunday, and it's like, what is this? The rescue the Republic? What
Yeah.
happened to the Republic? I didn't know it need rescuing. And
Right.
then I noticed there was a lot of people, my people that I know, like Brett and
Right.
other names. Jordan Peterson and Laura Logan. I don't know her, but and Dell Big Tree. Uh, it's like, oh, because I remember that guy. I met him at Freedom Fest, and he kind of buttonholed me in his booth to do an interview. I didn't even know who he was. And he's, hey, you're Mr. Skeptic. I'm a skeptic. Let's talk skepticism. Like, okay. So, we sit down before I know it, we're down the rabbit hole of vaccines and autism and,
Mm.
what they are doing to us and all this stuff. So I'm like, oh. And we ended up in, something of a heated discussion because he just kept throwing this stuff out and I just kept telling him, you're wrong about that. This and that, it causes autism. No, it doesn't. And here's why.
Right.
And he just kept saying, "Well, you're wrong." I'm like, "No, I'm right. I have the studies to show you. Just go on my website. I've written columns about it, written about it in my books. There's, hundreds of papers published about, the alleged cause and why it doesn't exist." And, it just turned into a slightly uncivil, well, it wasn't a discussion anymore. And so he ended up never using the interview.
Mm.
Like, okay,
That's
well, whatever. I mean, it's your show, dude. You can do what you want, but you asked me, and then when it didn't go the way you wanted it to, you censor me. This is a guy that says we're being censored,
right.
right? That
Yes.
they won't let us talk about certain things. Well, you have your own show, so apparently you can talk about these things, and you do all the time. I see him everywhere now.
Right.
Basically, he's a vaccine denier, vaccine hesitant, vaccine skeptic, whatever you want to call it. And so he's not being censored. And then he has me on the show, and I tell him he's wrong. And then, oh well, we're not going to air that one. Oh, so you're censoring me?
Right. Yeah. Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean,
It's a voice that he doesn't want to be out there, so therefore he shuts it down. And that guy, yeah, he directed a movie called Vaxxed, which I have not seen,
yeah,
and it's really just not something that would be on my radar. But apparently, he was making this big to do at the rally, and he was, claiming that apparently there are evil forces out there trying to suppress him. Actually, I didn't get a direct quote of his, but I wrote down a couple of impressions before we'll just linger on him for just a moment, and I'll actually give like a synopsis of this whole thing. But while
Yeah.
we're talking about him, let me see here. He said he claimed, he claimed they shut down the government during COVID because vaccine resistance was growing. And he was basically implying that whenever COVID happened, people like Anthony Fauci were turning everything into a police state because there was a anti-vax movement on the rise, and the government somehow or another he thinks that everybody in the government, it's like a monolithic creature to these people, that
Yeah.
everybody in the government thinks exactly the same. They're not just bureaucrats or people that go home at night and watch Netflix. These are all like a gigantic demonic force who get together at night, apparently have candles, and they discuss things and they try to figure out what malevolence we can pull on the American people today. This is the vibe that I get from somebody like this guy. And I'm sitting here thinking, isn't this the same government that has leaks constantly? They can't. We constantly notice the ineptness of or of everything that's going on, and yet again, it's this gigantic conspiracy. They can pull this off perfectly, and it's just and people like this portray the government in this way. How do you respond to something like
Oh
that?
yeah, that's been my response to this since we got into the business of studying conspiracies. I mean, back to the 9/11 truthers, they concoct this incredibly detailed, complicated conspiracy theory in which thousands of operatives would have to be in on it without anyone spilling the beans, no whistleblowers, no pillow talk where somebody knows somebody that was involved. They had to have, all the people in the right place at the right time. They had to break into the World Trade Center buildings, both of them, break through the drywalls to plant explosive devices in the structural beams without anybody noticing under the pretense of elevator repair. And then they took all the passengers off those planes and gassed them somewhere in a secret location, and then concocted fake cell phone calls with these special devices. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And they would have had to know ahead of time which floors the planes were going to hit at to put the explosive devices, because you could see the floors collapsing. All this is done by the Bush administration, purportedly the most incompetent government agency, administration we've ever had. I mean, they can't even get the wars right. Afghanistan, well, Iraq, well, we made it in Iraq. And Bush was at the time portrayed as this kind of bumbling, moronic president. And
Right.
somehow, yet they still pulled off the greatest conspiracy of all time. I mean, these things are kind of self-refuting that way. And it's the same thing with all this other stuff. Now, that said, let me just add that it's a different subject to be critical of parts of the government and decisions that are made,
Right. Yes.
like mask mandates or vaccine mandates. I mean, you can have a legitimate debate about to what extent the government should force people to do things for the greater good. This is a constant, push and pull in a republic or democracy, and so there's nothing wrong with having those debates. And I have to admit that the critics of Fauci do have a point. When he said, "Well, don't wear masks," and then, "Oh, you should wear masks," or that
Mm.
masks are going to prevent the spread, or that the vaccines will prevent the spread. And so, there was a lot of claims made. We need to close the schools. And then when it was apparent we didn't by the fall of 2020, so they decided in the summer, all right, we're going to close the schools and the restaurants and everything. But by the late fall, it was clear that we didn't really need to do that. And that
Mm.
the most vulnerable populations were the older populations and people with preconditions and so forth, not children. So it's legitimate to say, you know what, they got that one wrong.
Right.
And next
Yes.
time around, let's rethink this and not do that. And I've been critical of a lot of medical professionals who don't, or at least public health officials who make public statements where they don't couch it in a Bayesian argument, like, well, this is what we know now. There's a lot that we still don't know. So at the
Mm.
moment, we're going to recommend masks or vaccine or whatever. And then, but we'll reassess next week or next month, and we'll get back to you because you don't know, we don't know. We're just doing the best we can. I think the average person will go, yeah, okay, that seems fair. Yeah, all right, I'll listen to what they have to say. Instead, they make these pronouncements like 100% sure this is the right decision, and then it turns
Right.
out it's not. Then people say, well, you know what? You said this last time and you were wrong. And a lot of times they don't even admit they were wrong. So then the public loses trust. Okay,
Mm,
those are completely legitimate criticisms. But that's not what's going on here. This is something completely different. But you
mm,
hear in a lot of those speeches at the what was it? Rescue the Republic, was, as you said, this amorphous, blank face entity out there. They want to do this to us. They want to censor us. They want to control us, that sort of thing. And it's like, well, who's the they?
mm,
Exactly. I mean, and to be sure, the left does this about the right as well. They hate women, or they want to control all women reproductive choices. Well, who's the they? Because if you look at the polls, most conservatives do not go as far as the extreme pro-lifers, who say that not even the exception of rape and incest should be made. And that, but people on the left say all Republicans want to ban abortion completely and
mm.
have a national ban. Let's No, they don't. Most don't.
It's
There are
kind of
some,
Yeah,
you know.
it becomes a contest of hyperbole at the end of the day, where I'm gonna up you and you're gonna up me, and then it's just this gamesmanship that happens, and the people that are trying to think reasonably are like, what is going on here? And and going back to what you were saying though, as far as the thing is like, yes, let's criticize these people because that's the whole idea about an open society. We need to be critical of our leaders. But let's stop there. We don't have to add on another entity behind them that we're pointing at. It's like we could say, Anthony Fauci was wrong because he was legitimately wrong about a couple of things, but I don't think he was being malevolent based on something that was going on. And people that I read most of RFK Jr.'s book, that's this giant attack on Anthony Fauci. And I just thought the whole time it's like hyperbole or hyperbolic statement after hyperbolic statement. And actually, I was going to write an article about this, and it turned into a much greater project where I would literally have to write a book to confront the fuselage of, crap that's coming your way page after page. And what I found is if you follow those, I did this almost with every single um, citation. I would, because I was reading it on my phone, I followed each one of those, and a lot of those would end up leading back to his website. And then it would be like a 404 page missing. Some of that stuff was going on. Or it would go back to people, doctors that have been known to be frauds in the past about one thing or another. And I can already feel, I can hear the people that are behind RFK Jr. right now. They're going to say, "Where did you get that information?" And I'm going to say, "Well, I looked it up at so and so, and it was reported in, the Wall Street Journal or something." They're going to say, "Well, who owns the journal?" And again, you get back to the they. And Karl Popper he pointed out something interesting in the Open Society. I think it was in the Open Society, where he is he's known as the great critic of Marxism in the 20th century, and he noticed something about it, which is the fact that whenever you become a Marxist, you tend to every time you open the paper, it's affirming your Marxism. You're just like, Karl Marx was right again, 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 again. But nothing refutes Marx. And he noticed this with things like Marx and Freud and Alfred Adler, all these other people. And to me, it's conspiracy thinking's the same way. When you map it onto your brain and you take it on full force, as a lot of these speakers at this rally did, everything you read in the newspaper from then on just reaffirms the they that is after you or me or whatever. And I just feel like they're speaking in this way, like we're the ones being critical. And I'm thinking, not really, because everything you say is being reaffirmed by this worldview you've adopted, which I would call conspiracism or contrarianism, or and it's good to look out for conspiracies or be contrarian. I'm being a contrarian towards them right now, And but but I think that there's something about that. It's like this unfalsifiable thing, and it's it's sort of
Yes, yes.
it's really weird. Um,
Yeah, that is the problem with a lot of these claims. They're not falsifiable. And you're correct to ID Popper on that with his examples of Freud and Marx. They are by definition really not falsifiable.
mm.
And so when you ask a Marxist or a Freudian, what would it take to change your mind? The real answer is, well, nothing.
Right. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
most honest answer I heard on that question was when Bill Nye debated who's the young Earth creationist,
Ken Ham.
Ken Ham. And the moderator asked each of them, what would it take to change your mind about your position on evolution and or creationism? And Bill said, well, he gave the equivalent of JBS Haldane's, fossil rabbits in the Precambrian,
Right.
something that would just dramatically refute it. And but Ken Ham's answer was brutally honest. Nothing. This is the
Yeah.
truth.
That was
It's
the
just
one.
like
Yeah. Weirdly
so.
enough, that's yeah. He's being honest, but it's just wrong. I mean,
Well, it doesn't. It means you're not really playing the game of interacting with other people, and you're not acknowledging the fundamental premise of fallibilism. That is, where we all are fallible. You might
right.
be wrong, and this is what bugs me about RFKjr, who has some positions I like and respect. His criticism of the military-industrial complex, the regulatory capture by big pharma. He has some points there. But then he goes off on, some other tangent and, like I don't want to be wrong, but here's, the thing about the vaccines, and there was this study done in 1973 or blah blah blah, and then you look it up and it's like, well, no, he's wrong. And he says, please,
Right.
he says online, please send me, show me why I'm wrong. So you have people like Paul Offit that write whole Substack columns going, "Dear RFK Jr., here is what you said. Here is
Right.
what the study actually shows.
Right.
Here is why you are wrong. What is your response?" And his response is nothing. He doesn't respond. And I've
Right.
tagged him, other people tag him, and he doesn't respond. He just keeps repeating it. So that tells me he's not an honest broker.
Yes, they're not playing the game that we're trying to discover things in reality, and they're playing by their own rules for whatever reason. I guess actually this we could talk about what Jordan Peterson went on to talk about, which is power versus sacrifice. Before that, though, let me give for anybody listening just a summary. This comes from something you sent me last night, which I thought was so just so well written and just kind of hilarious simultaneously. But I agreed. I hate to say I agree with everything of anything, but I agree with everything about this. Um, it says this is a nice summary of the Rescue the Republic rally. This comes from the Wall Street Journal. Molly something wrote this. I forget her last name. It says a cross-partisan fringe united by little more than conspiratorial contrarianism. Right-wing libertarians mingled with left-wing peaceniks, tie-dyed long hairs and camo-clad beardos, mingling peaceably under the cloudy sky. They are easily dismissed as actors on the political margins, but in an age of an anti-establishment distrust, they could be a substantial pillar of Trump's support, which I agree with. The speakers on stage articulated a variety of grievances: vaccines, censorship, educational indoctrination, food additives, the Federal Reserve, the eponymous sponsoring organization behind during the eponymous sponsoring organization began during the COVID pandemic as Defeat the Mandates, then broadened to include opponents of aid to Ukraine. Homemade signs proclaimed, "Do not affirm, do not comply." The stage backdrop proclaimed a nefarious web of industrial complexes, academic, finance, military, immigration, medical. And again, um, just on that note, I feel like whenever they're saying all these things, people have this picture in their mind of the government as they anthropomorphize it, like it's actually an evil entity. And I'm like, guys, it's made up of people just like you and me. And if you overturn it, it's going to be made up of people like you, which was like people that were already there, fallible people who are corruptible, who are everything else. All
It's
that's going to happen is you're going to have more fallible people in there, and it's just not how things work. We have to approach changing government by criticizing it and doing it in a slow manner. Generally, if you try to do things too broadly, where you just do away with whole organizations and stuff, you're probably going to have a problem on your hands. And because you have a hypothesis that needs to be tested in smaller doses. And some of this actually comes from, again, I'm a huge advocate of the open society, and Popper always he always went with changing things on a slow and steady basis as opposed to revolutionary thinking. And that's actually why or people like Popper were opposed to things like libertarianism. He kind of identified with it. People like F.A. Hayek and all were his friends, but he didn't like the tone behind it, which was let's always do away with everything and start over. And then Popper would say, with what? And they would say, with the government. And they would be like, why are you doing this? Why not just, it's like evolution. Just fix what's there. It's already there. And let's shave what we need to shave. And that's how you do things, you know? So,
Yeah.
uh,
There was a Family Guy episode, I think it was Family Guy or Simpsons, in which they decided, no, it's Family Guy. They decided to ban the government, get rid of the government. We're tired of the bureaucrats and taxes and all that. So they
yeah.
do. And then at some point, the garbage starts piling up on the streets. It's like somebody really needs to pick this up. Well, who's going to do it? All right, we're going to hire somebody to do it. Well, how are we going to pay him? Well, we're going to make everybody chip in. It's like, well, but that's like taxes. Wait a minute. We didn't want
Right.
taxes. Yeah.
Right.
Um, so
Um,
yeah, so I mean, yeah, of course that's the problem. In every administration, both Democrat and Republican increases the debt. They all do, every one of them. I think the only exception in the last 75 years is Clinton,
right.
who didn't grow the debt because he got that peace dividend and the dot-com bubble and all that stuff to boost the economy. But Trump, the debt increased even more under Trump than it did the 4 years of Obama's previous administration, and he was going to, drain the swamp, to get rid of all the bureaucrats. We're going to fire people and clean this mess up and to get rid of waste. Well, that didn't happen, and it never happens. They all say it. It never happens. So, yeah, that's the problem. The other thing about you mentioned Hayek. It was von Mises that in Human Action, I think, said that it's not enough to be anti-communist. We have to be for something. What are
Mm.
we for? He wrote this in the 50s when, the kind of the height of McCarthyism and the fear of communism and anti-communism. And here's all the reasons why communism or socialism or Marxism won't work. All right, what will work? Well,
Mm.
we have to lay out our plan. What are our programs? What works? What actually defend capitalism and markets? Why do they work? Do they work? And so on. So that was his whole point. And I've always kept that in mind. Like, I'm an atheist, but well, it doesn't really mean anything. I just don't believe in God, but I do believe in other things. Like what?
Right.
Oh, like rights and justice and, whatever. So much of the Rescue the Republic was just anti woke, anti progressives, anti big government, anti mandates, anti censorship. Okay, well, what are you for?
Right.
And
Yeah.
Matt Taibbi's opening line was, you're supposed to start a speech with mentioning something that we all have in common. So he said, and with this audience and this group of speakers, nothing. We have nothing in common.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
okay. So, but I would say he's wrong about that. The one thing they have in common is they're all against something. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So what are you for? And when RFKjr says, well, I'm for health, I think our children should be healthy. Oh, well, that's a shocker. Who
It's a
doesn't think
platitude.
I know who doesn't think children should be healthy, and so on. But when he says, they are feeding our children these bad foods. Well, okay, I agree. The American diet is really pretty bad. I was just in South Korea. It didn't strike me until I was about ready to leave. There's no fat people in South Korea.
Right.
It kind of occurred to me like that. Oh, wow, that's what's missing. Why is that? They have healthier diets. Okay. But it isn't because they want to make us fat, whoever the they is, and keep us unhealthy. It's a product of capitalism, of markets, that food companies are doing what they got to do to sell more food and so on. And we do have volition and free will. You don't have to eat those foods. You can find, quality food and so on.
That kind of leads me to think every time they talked about that during during that rally, I was kind of like, well, wait a minute though. Well, so now you're saying that you're going to have to, you're not mentioning this, but you're going to need a regulatory system in place to regulate all of this stuff you want to take
Yeah.
out of these foods. I mean, you're going to have to be
Yeah.
banning things. Isn't
Yes.
that a little bit against what the whole thing you're doing here?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is actually, I'm going to go, there's a slight tangent on this. And I just want to see what you say about this really quick on this note, speaking of the free will thing, but like, the thing about fentanyl, I'm very sensitive to this stuff too. I myself I had to go through AA like in 2008. I'm not a drinker since 2008, so I've had issues with stuff in my life. I voluntarily did that. I just was like, I need to get a hold of this, and I've been sober of everything since then. But whenever
Oh,
I
I didn't know
see,
that. You were an alcoholic
right, yeah,
and you stopped.
exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
and
So on the free will issue, how did you do that? Because people say, well, people don't really have choice to determine. Well, apparently some people do.
right. Well, actually, weirdly enough, you and I would disagree a smidge on that, on the free will notion, but that would take us down a giant rabbit
Oh, you
hole.
would argue your decision not to drink anymore is itself determined by something.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
I see.
I would go all
Okay.
the way back to I
Yeah.
sort of land, and
All
we
the
and
way
I,
back to
you
the Big Bang.
the Big Bang, yeah. I hate that, and it sucks because I've tried to get around that. And even Popper was an indeterminist. He didn't he argued for indeterminism, and he was very much in favor of free will. And I'm writing about Popper, and I'm a an avid I sort of am a person that likes to espouse critical rationalism, which is what he was putting out there. But yeah, on some of those things, I just can't find the arguments that completely work with what is going on. The reason I bring this up though is whenever I was watching that rally, they talk about things about like, yeah, they're feeding us this food and the fentanyl is coming over the borders and all. But I'm like, but don't people choose? I mean, I'm walking down the street. I've never had fentanyl jump in my mouth. And it's like, I feel like that's kind of because it's a sensitive issue with a lot of people. And I get that. I know people that have actually passed away from fentanyl. And it makes me sad to think about. But on the other hand, I do think, yeah, but there's a market for that just because people are doing it, but it's not like somebody's force feeding it. And whenever you have a
Mhm.
rally like this, again, it's like about freedom and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, well, it's kind of hard to make argue. There's some sort of disparity or some sort of compartmentalization that's going on in people's brains whenever they're talking about these things. I feel like they're not being completely logical or rational.
Yeah.
And I don't know if do you know do you find that at all with the fentanyl thing? You might not want to comment on it, but
Oh, no, I'm happy to comment on it. As I mentioned, RFKj's criticism of big pharma capturing the regulatory state. We now know that's what happened with like the Sackler family and Purdue Pharmaceutical. They just bought off the regulators who
right.
kept poking around going, these things might be highly addictive. What's the research on that? Oh, the jury's still out. Or, oh, here's one study in this obscure journal that shows they're not addictive, the
Mm,
opioids.
right.
That's slightly different than the fentanyl, I guess, if you're talking about the government controlling what comes across our borders or illegal immigration of people carrying fentanyl or whatever that is, that might be slightly different. But there I think again, but as you pointed out, that would require then growing the government and doing
Right.
something about
Yeah.
the border and what is allowed in our country, what products and services and so on. But back to the rally, in part, when you have a rally, you're supposed to, give an inspirational speech, not a lecture.
Mm.
Which is why Jordan's speech was a little weird. It's like he was off on one of his, analysis of mythology or whatever, and it's like it was a little stiff and a little academic-ish and intellectual for that kind of audience. It's not clear to me. Do you know how many people were there? I mean, it didn't look that big. Like maybe some of the news reports had maybe a couple thousand at most.
That's what I
Uh,
saw. Yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
that mall is huge. There was a Reason rally that I spoke at, the first one, I think, when was that? 2008 or something like that,
Hmm.
2010 maybe. And there was like 30,000 people and it was huge. I mean, it was like football fields long on the mall there of people as far as you could see. And this didn't look anything like that. This looked like more of the kind of maybe a thousand, few hundred, maybe
Hmm.
several hundred to a thousand or two, maybe at most. Still, whatever. But rescue the republic from who? There were some
Right.
people that were openly supporting Trump. Not all of them said, yay, Trump, vote for Trump. But that, I guess, if there was any common theme, it was more pro-Trump than pro-Kamala Harris,
Oh yeah,
for
there
sure.
was no. I actually listened to. I can say honestly that I listened to the whole thing, sadly, from beginning to end for in preparation for this, just so I wasn't going to be unfair to them. So if anybody's watching this and you're saying, "Oh, you're throwing up all these straw men," and you didn't really watch it, I watched that whole thing. And actually, there was somebody that wasn't there that I was waiting on. They never showed up, and that was Charlie Kirk, and he was on the
Oh, that's
flyer.
right. He was supposed
Yeah.
to be on. Oh, right. What happened to him?
I don't know, but
Oh, I see.
after I got done, I was like, wait a minute, where I was waiting on that
So
maniac to show up.
nobody said anything nice about Kamala Harris or
Not at
Biden.
all.
Okay, good.
It was all pro Trump. Actually, to the point where many speakers actually said on November 8th, you know what to do or whatever, November, I think it's November 8th, vote for Trump, blah, blah, blah. To me, I actually said that I was talking to my wife. I was like, that rally was a Trump rally in drag. That's all it
Yes.
was.
Yeah.
I mean, it
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
at the end of the day, and I'm not real. I myself am somewhat of a centrist. And actually, you educated me last time we spoke, or one of the last times we spoke. You said something that just got in my brain, and it was for the better, which was I asked you about what part of the spectrum you were on politically, and you said, "Well, I don't really like this whole political spectrum thing." You gave sort of an analysis of it, and I actually thought it was so wise because, and not to toot your horn here, but like. Um, you actually said something that I've really resonated with me, which was like, hey, just look at everything as it comes. Like everything needs to be analyzed in its own, if we're talking about taxes, then look at that. If we're talking about, there's no need to filter this through this left-right divide. Just use reason. That was sort of the synopsis or the thrust of what you were saying. And man, I'll tell you what, that sort of, I stopped looking. I've just been like, I don't know what I am nowadays, but I just want to use reason and just proceed as, as need be. But I will say this, as far as all these people, just being on Trump's side. No, I'm like, and they're like, oh, talking about Anthony Fauci and the pandemic and the shutdowns. I'm like, you realize most of that was under Trump, and he could have done
Yes.
something
Right.
about all of
Right.
that. And there are like all these wars across seas are happening, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, the only adversity that I recall Trump having, other than like social unrest as far as race and stuff goes, was was the pandemic, and he fumbled that immensely. Like, and that's why, and people are like, we want him back in office. He was really looking out for us. I'm like, I think they have amnesia about what happened under
Hmm.
him. But,
Hmm.
and, and also not to mention all of the other stuff that's going on. You mentioned Jordan Peterson though. Yeah, he went on this thing about literary criticism and about Marxism, and I just wanted to hear your reaction.
Postmodernism, yeah,
Postmodernism.
that's his standard shtick. I agree with a lot of that. I think that the postmodernism goes too far.
I do
And a
too.
lot of this, everybody's truths are equal and so on. But that's not to say that, that culture doesn't influence our ideas. Of course it does. So
Mm,
you have to be aware of that and correct for it if you can and so on. But again, it's a rally, so he's, pushing one particular story, which was his story, which is we all have a story. So
mm,
he's kind of it's kind of a meta thing. And he's up there with Russell Brand, who I'm not sure what to make of Russell Brand. I guess he became a Christian. Is
yes.
Jordan a Christian? I was just at this conference in Florence, Italy, sponsored and hosted by Peter Thiel, who's a Christian, and who's a gay conservative Christian, which is an interesting thing. That's no longer a big deal. That used to be a big deal, but
Right. Yeah.
yeah, that's how much moral progress we've made. In any case, most of the people there were very intellectual scientists, philosophers, and so on, scholars who were mostly Christian. There was only maybe three of us atheists there. And so we got to talking about Jordan Peterson. And, I was making the argument, look, guys, I'll concede that you may hold certain truths about what the Bible says or about issues we both care about in the literary sense. That is to say, if you treat the Bible as a work of literature, and we think of other works of literature, Shakespeare, Dostoevsky, Jane Austen, what makes great literature? What makes a great novel? What makes a novel great? And the answer is, well, because it touches on deep truths about human nature, human society, good and evil, conflict, love, hate, jealousy, war. This is what great novels are about, and they're teaching us something,
Mm.
something, a deep truth about human nature and so on. But to ask, were there really four brothers Karamazov in 19th century Russia? These characters in Shakespeare's play, did they really exist? Was there really a Harry Potter and there was this weird 9.5 train station that goes off to this? People would look at you like you lost your mind. What do you mean? It's a novel. Those are
Right.
just characters to deliver this deeper truth, right? So you see where I was going with this with the Bible. But these intellectual Christians, they were not having this.
Mm.
And I kind of invoked Jordan Peterson because I know they all respect him. And they're like, yeah, but no, we don't mean this mythologically.
Mm.
Because I brought up the resurrection. Like maybe the resurrection didn't really happen. It's a story about being reborn, starting over, forgiveness, and the kingdom of heaven is within you. Remember, Jesus said that, kingdom of heaven. And people ask Jesus, when is this? Where is this heaven? And he's like, people say it's here, people say it's there. I'm telling you, the kingdom of heaven is within you.
Mm.
And so maybe that's what he meant in a mythological sense, a literary truth, a deep mythological truth, sort of like Jordan Peterson. And their response was, oh, no, 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 no. We're not, that is not what we believe. We believe the resurrection literally happened. He was
Mm.
really alive, then he was really dead, and he really came back to life.
Mm.
And we're tired of Jordan kind of waffling on this stuff. We want him on our side. Come on, Jordan, just own it. You're a Christian, own it. And I thought,
He
oh, that's interesting.
yeah, he does. Actually, this whole, by the way, that's one thing I noticed throughout the whole, besides Matt Taibbi, everybody else evoked God talk. I mean, very, very, and some just explicitly extremely Christian. And Russell Brand obviously was one of the big ones.
Right?
Jordan
He has a
Peters,
cross. He's wearing a cross.
and that giant, the V-neck that goes down to his navel. It's
Yeah.
like, what is
But I don't
going
know
on
his
there?
story. What didn't he just convert recently or something like that? But wasn't he a drug addict and he had all these personal problems and then he became a
Yes.
Christian?
I'll just say this about this, and this is something I noticed in the rooms of AA. I loved AA and whenever I went there, and it became like a big social thing for me too. It was just like, you go in, and I became a massive coffee drinker, and I loved chit-chatting with people, and it was great. I like sponsoring guys. I was sponsored by people. And it became like a really cool thing. Something I noticed though about people in recovery, this happened all the time, is they end up wanting to be like counselors or something afterwards, or they want to like start preaching to the world about this or that. And to me, Jordan Peterson, or excuse me, Russell Brand has that vibe. Like he's like a post AA guy or a post recovery guy, which I remember he wrote a book about recovery, and now he just wants to espouse this to the world. But what a lot of these people don't realize is you have to get, you know, certificates and credentials, and you got to know what you're talking about and all. But a lot of people just don't do that, and then they start, trying to be counselors or trying to do this or that. And I always looked at this. I was like in the rooms thinking, these people they just got to where they can just function normally as human beings, and now they want to like tell the world how to live morally and all this stuff. It doesn't, and I guess my point is that's what I'm sort of seeing with Russell Brand, and now he's adopted Christianity, which I sort of, it seems like a grift to me though. Whenever I see him, like he does all this like just all this expounding with giant words and multi there's a lot of
Syllabic.
syllabic words, and
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's always a word salad of like spiritual goobly goo and just like this and that, and he mixes it together, and then he mixes it with a stew of conspiracism. People eat it up though. And that's why I think there's some sort of grift behind it. I'll see what you say about this. A lot of these people, and I'm gonna actually I don't know any of these people. I probably never will, but like um Bret Weinstein strikes me like this too. I feel like he maybe was once this like highly respectable evolutionary biologist, and he's obviously a good evolutionary biologist. I've heard him speak about that, and he sounds as sound as ever. And I'm currently studying a lot of Darwin, so he rings true to me, and Richard Dawkins and all this kind of stuff. But I feel like he's taken on this other thing, which is he's owned by his audience, where like he's noticed a signal that's rose in the noise of his thing, and he's probably constantly on X, and he's always looking and always and now he's playing to that crowd, and it's like I've witnessed these people in real time. Their brains have just been shaped by their audience in a lot of ways. That's a theory of mine. Do you have any response to that or?
I think there's some truth to that. You know, I can't, it's hard to say for any one particular person, Brett or his brother or anybody else, Russell Brand. You know, to capture a large audience and to convert that into a revenue stream on social media, you can't just be boring and repeat what everybody already believes. You really have to stand out somehow. And I've noticed this with my own work because my North Star is the truth, whatever's true. So, like, my take on conspiracy theories, you know, I wrote a whole book, Conspiracy,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, uh, people don't want to hear from me so much as they want to hear from the people who actually believe the conspiracy theories.
Right.
You know, that JFK was assassinated by the CIA. You know, this just gets all kinds of play, you know, 9/11 inside job, and, you know, this conspiracy, that conspiracy. You know, and if you say, well, you know, maybe, but probably not, and here's why, it's like, oh, that's a snooze. Come on, that's boring.
Right.
You know, just repeating the status quo. Well, but what if the status quo's right? I just want to know
Mm-hmm.
what's right. I don't care who's the outsider. I mean, you can be a skeptic of climate change. You could be a skeptic of the climate skeptics. You know, it's just skepticism is just we just want to know what's true, right? So I think I probably could have grown my audience much larger and the revenue stream more if I would have, you know, gone down some pathway of just pushing some particular idea. And I don't do that because that's not what I do. I can see why other people do it. Are they consciously doing that? I don't know. It's hard to say what's in somebody's heart and mind, but it seems like following Brett. I've known Brett since, you know, he became famous when he left Evergreen, and I like him a lot. His brother too, but it seems like they go off on these tangents, and I have no idea what they're even talking about.
Right.
And you know, they have this like meta analysis of, you know, some abstract idea of society and economics, and this is happening and that's happening, and, you know, it's like, what? Give me an example. I
Right.
don't know
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
you're talking about. A lot of it's pretty abstract, but they're kind of making a deeper point that, you know, you can't trust anybody, or, you know, they are doing this, or institutional capture by ideologues. And yeah, but give me some specific examples, because, you know, I'm sure there's examples on the other side.
Mm,
And you know, I think everybody tends to do this because we're pretty tribal. I've just done a couple of podcast episodes on the religious right.
mm,
And you know, this Christian nationalism is a thing, in part, Project 2025, and but this goes back a few decades. And these are the authors of these books are both pretty far left
mm,
journalists, but they're not really journalists. I think they're advocacy journalists. Let's call it advocacy journalists, where you can just see it in the language. They're not just telling us this is what these Christian nationalists are arguing, or this is what they want to do to change the law, you know, overturn Roe and that kind of stuff. You know, but there's a judgment of it. They're bad. They're evil. They hate women. And, you know, like one thread was, um, these conservative men are murdering women. They're killing women, and they are evil. You know,
mm,
they are the enemy. You know, I said, what are you talking about, murdering women? Well, uh, there's examples of women who bleed out in these abortion clinics because they can't get the abortion that they need. So they, they try to do a self-abortion or back alley abortion, or whatever, and they're dying. Well, how often is this happening?
Mm,
And it's pretty rare, and
hmm.
very rare, in fact. And so this accusation that, I don't know how many registered Republicans there are, like 80 million or 90 million or something. And how many did Trump get? 76 million in the last. You're telling me, like 80 million Americans are the enemy? The
Right.
enemy?
Yeah,
I
that's
mean, this
as
is the problem.
statistically wrong.
I mean, I just had Max Boot on the show talking about Reagan, and there was some rhetoric even then that, the Democrats are the enemy, and he corrected, his own team, like they're not the enemy. These are our fellow Americans. We have to get along
Mm.
with these people. We need them. You
It's
know,
it, it reminds me of whenever John McCain, that famous clip of him
yes, yes,
correcting that
yes,
audience member who
yes,
said he's a
yeah,
Muslim, and he said
yeah.
no, he's talking about
No,
President
man.
Obama. He's a good family man or whatever, and then like
Yeah,
everybody was like, oh my God. I admired that with McCain because I was like, he's just trying, like he was legitimately trying to, speak
yeah.
the truth, and that's yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the divisiveness, but it's not just they, it's they, the evil ones, the
Mm.
enemy, the wrongdoers that we have to get rid of and destroy. It's just, and it's on both sides.
So yes, and you live in California. I live in Florida, so I think that our terrain is probably a lot different. And I'll
Yes.
say this, put it this way, like if you there's no Kamala signs here. You got Trump flags and Trump signs everywhere, every which way you look. I think that but I have a lot of friends that like are going to vote for Kamala and like most of my friends are going to do that. And yet, and these aren't like progressive, like these are just centrist, people that just don't like what Trump was all about and all that kind of stuff. But the thing is, the reason that people don't put stuff like that, they don't support Kamala. I probably wouldn't do it anyways because I don't support any of these people openly. But like, it is that people don't do it because Democrats have been labeled demons who drink the blood of children. And in Florida, people think that. Because I mean, like, I'm like, you'll go outside and you talk to people for a minute and you'll realize, oh, shoot, they think I'm a, demon possessed blood drinker. It's
Pedophile.
like,
Yeah,
yeah. And it's like
yeah.
literally the worst thing on the planet. So nobody openly supports. I mean, it is really rare. But yet on election day, you will see in Florida, it'll be like maybe this year might be different because Florida's turned a lot more red. But you'll definitely see it's close, and people are always like, "Why? How is this possible?" I'm like, "I live here, and I'm not a Trump supporter, but I'm not going to openly say anything otherwise because it's kind of terrifying, to be honest with you. These
Hmm.
people, I don't want to be labeled a globalist who's, blah, blah,
Globalist, yes, the
blah.
old globalist.
Yeah,
Right, right.
right.
Who
So,
who who are these globalists exactly?
right.
Name names. Well, this again, conspiracies like with Oliver Stone.
Mm.
They killed, JFK. Well, who's the they? Well, okay, the CIA. Everyone in the CIA was in on it. I mean,
Right.
who in the CIA? Well, Alan Dulles. Oh, Alan Dulles. Okay. Do you have any, paperwork on this? Any whistleblowers? Is there a memo somewhere? Did he put it in writing? Did he pay anybody off? How did they hire the shooters? How did they pay them? There's, usually when we find out about real conspiracies, which there are, there's some paper trail. You have to have some evidence. You can't just say it. Then
Mm.
you're no better than Trump saying, a lot of people are saying, people are saying,
Right.
what
Right.
people? Oh, a lot of people.
Mm.
Well, which lot of people? Oh, tremendous. They're tremendous people. This is
Yeah.
not helping. You got to cite your source, bring some receipts with that. And that
This
just doesn't, yeah.
The that brings me to this other thing I noticed at the rally. Even Rob Schneider was like he was like and Marxism is blah 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 as infiltrated this or that, and he goes, and all Marxism is as dressed up manners or something. I don't know what his quip was, but like I was sitting here thinking, who? Okay, I have Das Kapital in my home because I'm trying to study it for this Popper thing because Popper was his big critic. And to be honest with you, this book, just volume one, is like 1,300 pages.
Yeah,
There's people when they talk about Marxism,
they haven't read
I'm
it.
like, they don't know what these things are. I don't even know what most of it is. I mean, it's just like this thing. You can apply a bunch of stuff to it, and people talk about postmodernism, Marxism. This was mentioned that thing, and I'm just like, who in this audience is reading Jacques Derrida? I mean, like,
No, nobody,
no, but who's reading?
nobody.
Who is
Yeah,
digesting Michel Foucault on a daily basis and
yeah,
just trying to implant it in their life? And yeah, I just what they would say, what Jordan would say is it's infiltrated in the system, though. And then again, this goes back to the whole thing of, and it might very well be, I wouldn't doubt that, but like. But again, there's not a falsifiability to it though. Again, if you start thinking like this, everything you watch on TV, every time Disney puts out a new movie, you're just going to be focusing on anything that strikes you as postmodern. And I'm just like, folks, this is not this way of I don't know what to make of it. That's all I can say. But
yeah, yeah. And then I noticed, well, Rob Schneider, I don't know him. I didn't know he was religious. And again, just to make a distinction here, if somebody says, I became a Christian and it really changed my life, it made things better, like Ayaan Hirsi Ali did, and she wrote that essay, and then she did a podcast episode with the I forget what the publication was, but they had a podcast as well, and she said, well,
trigonometry or something.
no, it
Or,
wasn't trigonometry. It was the place where it was originally published. And she said, "Well, I did it for personal reasons. I had a drinking problem, and I was depressed, and I mean, like severely depressed.
mm,
And then so I became a Christian, and now I'm much better. So on a personal level, it's like, okay, good. I'm happy for you. Whatever it takes to get through the night. I mean, life is hard, and people have issues, and okay, fine. It's like when I met uh, oh shoot, who's the Grammy Award winning singer? Oh, Isaac Hayes.
mm,
And I met him at a Thanksgiving dinner. He was a friend of my best friend, and he's sitting right across from me for hours. And this is at the kind of a height of his Scientology fame and his comeback in his career. And I said, what? I didn't say it in a critical way. He didn't even know who I was. What is it you get out of Scientology? What does it do for you? And he said, well, Michael, I'll tell you. I was, I became world famous. I had money, and I won a Grammy Award for theme from Shaft and all this stuff. I had everything, and then then sex, drugs, rock and roll, the whole thing. Then I lost everything, and then the Scientologists helped me get out of off drugs, off of alcohol. They get my life back together, and now I've made a comeback in my career. I'm like, okay, what do you say to that? I mean,
right.
but Isaac, don't you know it's all bullshit? I'm not going to say that.
Right. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
wouldn't say that to Ayan either. But then she, goes a step further and now says, but it's actually true. I mean, it's the correct religion. It's the right religion.
Right.
And that Jesus was really resurrected from the dead. He is our savior, and so on. And so you'll hear like there's a public event where she and Richard Dawkins did a conversation. And of course, Richard's like, you can't possibly believe this bullshit.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I do, Richard. No, you don't really believe it. I mean, that he kind of pitched my approach of, you mean it just kind of mythologically. No, I don't. Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
You're like,
And the moment you make that transition, it's actually true, literally true. It's the truth. Then you do feel a kind of a compulsion to tell other people about it. Well, I know
mm,
you're not a Christian, but here's why you're wrong, and here's why I am, and this is why you should be like me. Okay.
mhm.
Yeah. So that's where when you cross that line, that it becomes a problem.
The reason this reminds me, speaking of Ayan Hirsi Ali, like, and actually on the note of hers, I read her article, Why I'm Now a Christian, which was obviously alluding to Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian. Or she, I actually, it was weird. Her actual original article was basically like, I'm being a Christian because it's the only way to confront
Oh
Marxism,
yes,
or,
yeah, yeah,
and I was
that
just kind of
part, yeah,
like, I was like, Isn't that what reason's for? Like, why
yeah,
do we
yeah,
need,
right,
yeah, like,
right,
why do you
yeah.
need to do that?
Well, but she
Um,
means it more culturally and politically. Like at least the the Christian right will stand up to the Islamic influence. She
yes,
means politically, not just culturally.
that's the good
Yeah, yeah,
distinction.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
So,
And then
and
they
that,
had Laura Logan.
yes,
And
yeah.
and I used to really like her when she was on 60 Minutes. She did good journalism, but
Hmm.
then she kind of went off the deep end. And I mean, she got booted off of Fox News. She was too loony for them,
Yeah.
and now, she's anti-vaxxer, climate science denial, AIDS is not caused by HIV, 9/11, the whole, she's just like, you name it, I believe it. Woo! And and then she's always, I'm censored. Well, no, she's not. She's world famous. She has her own channel and she can write books, whatever. She's free to do whatever she wants. But when you get kicked, when you get fired, or a publisher says, we don't want to publish you because we think you're a nut, that's not censorship.
Yeah,
you know,
that's them making a decision based on your
yeah,
weird ideas.
yeah. I mean, I don't have to, I can publish whoever I want in Skeptic. It's my magazine. I'm in
Right.
charge. I don't have to publish a Holocaust denier. I'm not censoring them. If they were to send me an article, I would say, no, thanks.
That's a good distinction right there, Michael, is the idea that people confuse free speech with, they think that, I think a lot of people do this where they think you're censoring people when you're literally just not platforming them. The reason you're
Right.
choosing not to platform these people is because you, as a free thinker, are like, I've looked into it and what they're saying is insane. Why would I want them to come on my channel and muddy up everything? I don't want that. And then people are like, you're censoring them. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, that's just not, that's not what and for a podcast like yourself, you're just like, that's not what I do here. I don't just like, I'm not going to dish with somebody and then make, legitimize them. It's like Richard Dawkins always says, he's always like, I'm not going to talk to creationists because I don't want to legitimize them. I mean, he's like, I'm not censoring them. By all means, do your creationism stuff. But if I'm sitting beside this person, it makes it look like there is an argument here. And I'm like, there just is
Right.
not. It's just like,
Right.
you
Right.
know, that actually, and this leads me to something about this, though, is that on this audience capture thing again, and I was reminded of it whenever we were talking about Ayan Hirsi Ali. Again, it seems to me that a lot of people are getting captured by their audience and being love bombed by Christian people and conservatives and Trump lovers and all this kind of stuff. And something I've noticed about like yourself and speaking of Richard Dawkins and Steven Pinker is another good example. There are a lot of scientists that are admirable or writers, science writers that are admirable, and they could easily, like you said, create another revenue stream, but they have integrity. They're not, they just choose Steven Pinker, I can tell like anytime he posts something on X, that is an extremely he's an extremely fascinating thinker to me, but he doesn't post things that are like going to charge people's emotions, even though he has like whatever a million followers. He could do that easily, but the guy chooses not to because he's like, I want the truth. That's what I want, and that's my impression of him. But um, and I just feel like there's like a thing going on where it's like people. I just noticed this change in people lately, and you can actually see it with political people. Tulsi Gabbard was at the event, and I'm like, wait a minute, she was a Democrat like 4 years ago. Now she's a flat out Trump supporting,
Yeah.
like
What do you make of that?
Republican. It's weird.
I
I
forget
think,
what she said in her speech. What was her thing?
oh man, it was, that's
Oh, it
one.
was the militarism, right? We have a lot
Yes, yeah, yeah,
of
exactly.
overseas entanglements. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot. I just recorded a podcast episode with Edward Goldberg. He's a NYU political scientist who specializes in foreign policy, American foreign policy. And so his book is on how America became the world hegemon. And he
Mm,
said, when I started off on this book, I didn't think really we needed to be the world's hegemon. Why are we the world's police? You know what? And it turns out when you dig into it, there are good reasons why we have 900 military bases around the world and why we support all these countries. He said, we have treaties with 51 different nations in which
mm.
we have trade with them. We have trade agreements. We have, and in exchange, they're going to buy our stuff and we're going to provide some military support there so they don't get invaded. And, he had examples of where, like, people don't know this, but like some Iowa farmer is selling his soybeans to some foreign country. And the delivery of the soybeans there is protected by the U.S. Navy. Because
Mm,
if it wasn't, the pirates would take the stuff, right? So there's a lot of things like that, like hundreds of examples of that, where, our apparent, wasteful military spending is actually doing a lot of good for those countries, but also for our country, because we do business with these other countries. And that the stability and peace brought by the U.S. military in these foreign countries is actually good for America. But you
right.
never hear that. All you hear is, like, well, we're spending $1 trillion, complete waste of money. We could build. I mean, who? Somebody was talking about that at the rally. Was, we I think it was RFKjr. We could spend the money on schools and roads and
Yeah.
infrastructure. Instead, we're spending it, on Ukraine or whatever. But there's reasons we do these things,
Mm-hmm.
by treaty, by agreement, by trade, and relationships with these countries that we've had for decades, since the Second World War. So at least acknowledge there's an argument to be made for why we're doing this.
Mm-hmm. Did you find that people, some of those speakers, I mean, Tulsi Gabbard being one, and she served the country, which I admire that. But do you, and I think she's still in the army actually, or some sort of
I think she's in
branch.
the reserve. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's clearly admirable. There's like 1% of the population joins the army in, or the military rather, in the United States. So anytime I come across somebody, I'm like, that's cool. Um, that being said, though, I feel like a lot of the no war talk or like endless war talk that was going on at this thing is was kind of naive. I mean, it was just like we're not gonna go over there because we want to stay here. And it goes to what you were just saying, which is that we're not doing this because we like it. Nobody likes war. It's a platitude to say we want peace. Of course we want peace. But
Yeah.
like, you know what I mean? But it's just, but there's sometimes you have evil people in the world or actual entities who want to destroy other people. For instance, basically everybody around Israel literally wants to destroy Israel. And Israel doesn't have the luxury of two oceans and two friends, top and bottom. They
Mhm.
are surrounded by these people. And I hear like weapons embargo on them and blah, 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 or Ukraine. I'm like, guys, I'm like, if Canada invaded us, would you be thankful for your friends at that point in time? Of course you would. And we don't live in this fairyland that these people are making it out to be. That said, I don't think forever wars are a good thing, obviously, but again, it's a platitude to say that. It's just if nobody wants that. And I know that they would say, well, the military industrial complex wants that because Halliburton and blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, again, this is capitalism. This is who makes weapons? Somebody's got to make weapons. All these gun lovers, you get your guns from somewhere. Somebody's making these things. Somebody makes money from them. We could monetize anything and make money. That's the whole thing of capitalism. And to demonize it by saying like globalists or again this they that they're always talking about just
Yeah.
sort of
Imagine if Hezbollah was in Mexico and they
yeah,
launched missiles into San Diego,
right.
and the missiles hit UC San Diego and San Diego State and the harbor there, and there's a naval military base there, and then there's the Top Gun school inland in Miramar. And what if how many New York minutes would it be before the U.S. military responded,
And how many
with
people in
like
the
massive retaliation?
right and people in the US would be like, thank you. You
Of
know what I mean?
course, of
Yeah.
course. So I don't, Israel has to do what it has to do given their history. I know there's room for criticism of Netanyahu and the maybe apparent overkill in his response to October 7th and so on. And, the West Bank and the settlements, this and that. Yeah, okay, fine. But if you look at the 4,000-year history of Judaism and how they have been treated as a people and all the pogroms and genocides and anti-Semitism and hatred, post World War II, where Hitler almost finished the job that
Mm,
most people wanted before that. And and when they finally said, okay, you know what? Never again.
mm,
We're gonna get our own country. We're going to have a military, and we're never going to allow this again. You try to do this again, we are going to fuck you up.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, they are badasses. And it's like, okay, but I understand why. I mean,
Right.
it's,
It,
it's,
people, if you barely look at the history of the Jews and what they've gone through, as you said, for like the last 4,000 years of recorded history, there's never been a place where they've not been demonized or hated for either being below people or above people or this or that. And it's just yeah, it's like it's actually the one thing where I don't know. I actually started really thinking about this lately. Like, am I a Zionist? Because I'm like, I'm sort of opposed to it's kind of an iffy thing because I'm
well,
like,
Zionism is not really religious based. It's more political.
that's true. And I actually kind of am. Actually, I think I am because I'm really thinking about it. I'm like, I think that those people, I want the Jews to be safe for crying out loud. So I want
Yeah.
them to, you know what I
Yeah.
mean, and be
Yeah.
able to go
Yeah.
to a place that's
So I asked Goldberg, what do you think happens if Trump wins? And he said, well, on Ukraine. And his response was, he'll cut a deal. He'll tell Zelensky, all right, back down. He'll tell Putin, okay, look, stop fighting. You could keep everything you have now, and we're just going to draw the line and end it. So the problem with that, of course, is that Putin's not going to stop. He'll just wait a while and then go, okay, now I'm going to take this. Maybe I'll invade Poland. We'll see what Trump does or whoever the American president is 4 years after that, and maybe I'll go back in and take this and that and the other. And if you don't stand up to the bully, they're just going to keep going,
right. Yeah,
like in Munich in 1938.
that's true.
That they didn't stand up to Hitler, and he just kept going. His own generals told him, we're not ready. If they don't,
Mm,
if they stand up to us, if they don't agree, we're in big trouble.
right. Yeah.
And then Chamberlain went there, and they said, all right, you can have this and that and the other, but no more.
Right. Yeah, he was naive there, actually, it seems to me. Neville Chamberlain
Well,
is.
yeah, but given the what happened in World War One and how devastating it was for everybody, I can see why they didn't want to go through that again.
Yeah.
That's history. Now
What's
we know.
that? What's that? I was actually going to write it down. What is that book and what's the author's name again?
Oh,
The
Edward Goldberg.
Edward Goldberg.
Edward Goldberg.
Yeah, I'll look
Yeah.
it up.
So the book is something, America is the world's hegemon or something. United
Oh
States is the
man.
world's hegemon is in the title. It's an academic work.
Okay,
But
yeah.
it's it's deeply researched.
Man, that's
And he
cool.
shows if you want a response to RFKj's criticisms of the American military industrial complex, and if he was president, he would just close all those bases and bring the troops home and no more entanglements and so on, isolationism. Well, there's consequences to that, massive consequences for
Right.
us, not for
Mm.
just those other countries, for our own economy.
Yeah.
We live in a globalist. We live in a globalized world. We do. We have
Yeah.
trade agreements with hundreds. Well, no, what's I don't know, 51 countries. He said we have treaties with, and then trade agreements with like another 100 countries.
Hmm.
This is the world we live in, and
Right.
you want to you want to put up the walls and go, that's it, we're out, we're not playing the international game anymore. Yeah, well, where's your iPhones going to be made?
Right. And how much are
You
you
know,
willing to pay for these iPhones? Like
your
$40,000.
iPhone, and yeah, exactly, yeah. This is the world we live in.
It's naive whenever people again there's stuff that not we're not saying that it's you can't criticize this stuff. It's okay. We criticism is the key, but it's not it's going beyond that and adding a story to it is the problem. And that's what we saw at the just to bring it back to this is like the Rescue the Republic rally. There was a lot of talk of they, and it wasn't criticism in the sense of like, okay, this is what we do. Actually, on that note, I really couldn't tell what the main message of that thing was. It really was kind of
There was no
all
main message.
yeah,
It was just
yeah.
we're against something is really bad. Okay.
Yeah, something is really bad.
Yeah.
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 So, anyways, is there anything else you wanted to touch on,
I
Michael?
think that probably pretty much covers it.
Hey, here's
Yeah.
something before we leave that I was going to ask you. Have you read this? This is completely off subject, or you can't see it, but Darwin, the by Adrian Desmond and James Moore. Have you
Yeah,
read that?
that's of course, yes. I read, my doctorate's in history of science. My specialty was Darwin and Wallace and evolutionary theory. So, yeah. but the definitive book now that's kind of supersedes that one is Janet Brown's 2 volume biography of Darwin.
Right. I just
Excuse me.
I got
Those
that.
guys, they have a little bit of more of a political angle on Darwin, or I don't know what. My sense was their ideology was influencing their
It
historicism.
doesn't feel
Um,
academic. The book. I mean, I love it because it's written so smoothly, but it doesn't
yeah,
feel like
it's a great read. Yeah, no, Janet Brown is on solid ground there. She's very
cool. Yeah.
there's just you're just getting history, not current events or whatever political
Yeah.
theory.
Yeah. Yeah, because they talk about, and they actually went on, that team went on to write one called Darwin's Sacred Cause, which was about
Oh,
his,
right.
being against slavery. However, Darwin did sort of hold retrograde view. He held that view of the chain of being that Aristotle held in a sense, because he looked at lower animals versus higher animals versus blah blah blah. That's what I get from it. But
You gotta put historical characters in their own culture, not yours.
yes, exactly.
It's
Yeah, that's
like
true.
by Darwin's day, the standards of Darwin's day, he was pretty liberal, pretty
Yeah.
tolerant, pretty open,
Oh yeah.
and pretty fair about judging other people.
Mm.
That said, I mean, he didn't think women were the equal of men, for running countries or whatever, and or that blacks were intellectually the same as whites. Same thing as Jefferson and Lincoln. You can find quotes from all the founding fathers. I'm not saying blacks are equal to whites. I'm just saying we shouldn't treat them this way. You know,
I'll tell
I
you.
mean, again, it sounds awful today, but by their own standards, it was actually pretty cutting edge.
Oh my gosh, Erasmus Darwin, his grandfather was like a freaking. To me, he was like a straight rebel, though. He had some.
Yeah.
I,
Oh,
I-
yeah. Yeah.
it's wild to think. I mean, whenever I read about that guy, I'm just like, man, that's crazy that he lived in the time that he did, because it was so. First of all, he wasn't religious, and everything about him is pretty interesting to
Oh,
say.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. There was a group called the Lunar Society of, shoot, it was at one of those industrial towns, Lunar Society of Edinburgh. Was it Edinburgh? No, Lunar Society. Yeah. Anyway, the Lunar Society was a group of these Scottish Enlightenment, Adam
Mm.
Smith and
Hmm.
David Hume and all those guys, Erasmus Darwin,
The
and
real enlightenment.
they met on the Monday closest to the full moon, so that when they went home after drinking all night and talking, they could get home by carriage by the light of the moon. And so it was
Mm.
called the Lunar Society. And it was sort of a just kind of a gathering of great minds to talk about interesting ideas, like a coffee house kind of thing, which was also popular at the time. Coffee houses were a really gathering of radical minds and all that stuff. Yeah. So yeah, the Lunar Society
That's
is,
awesome.
look it up. There's a book about the Lunar Society and what
I
they
will.
did.
I will. I know that. I think, didn't Darwin go to? And we'll close right here. But didn't Darwin go to? Seem like, didn't he want to be by David Hume? Was that what it was? It's like he wanted to live kind of in the vicinity.
Birmingham, Lunar Society of Birmingham. That's it.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, man, that's
Yeah.
cool. Or no, David
Uh,
Hume was. He was. I'm sorry, Adam West
Adam Smith. Yeah.
Smith. Yeah,
Yeah,
Adam
the
West.
Lunar Society of Birmingham was a British dinner club and informal learned society of prominent figures in the Midlands Enlightenment, including industrialists, natural philosophers, and intellectuals who met regularly between 1785 and 1813 in Birmingham. At first called the
Okay.
Lunar Circle, the Lunar Society became the formal name by 1775. The name arose because the society would meet during the full moon, as the extra light made the journey home easier and safer in the absence of street lighting. The members cheerfully refer to themselves as lunatics, a contemporary spelling with CK. Erasmus Darwin's home is one of the places. Oh, Matthew Boulton, the steam engine guy, along with the other guy who did the steam engine. Yeah, Bolton, Watt, James Watt was
Oh
also part of
yes.
that. Yeah. No, I mean, these are like, a huge group of intellectuals at the time, just going through the list here of who people will have heard of: William Herschel, the astronomer; Joseph Banks, the botanist; Benjamin Franklin, of course;
Mm.
James Hutton, the geologist. I mean, really, it's a who's who. Yeah, Joseph Wright, the inventor and
Mm.
industrialist. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's great. It's great. It's a great story.
That's awesome.
All right, Eric.
Yeah,
Nice to see
man.
you.
Likewise.